Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I'm here to finish out Short Story September. So during the month of September, I made a goal to read 30 short stories, roughly one a day, but I decided to say 30 short stories in the month of September instead of a short story every day, just to give myself a little leeway in case something happened. And that ended up being a good idea. There was, I think, one day when I didn't have a chance to read, but the bigger problem was I would run into longer stories and I wouldn't have a chance to read the entire story in a day. So having that leeway to kind of catch up when I needed to was very valuable. And I have been coming on every week and kind of updating you, but I still have the last little bit, the last part of a week to update you on, and then I'm going to do a quick little wrap up. So since we last updated, I read 5 short stories. The thing is, I only needed to read 4 short stories to complete my 30 short stories in a month. So bonus. So the stories I read, the first one was An Ache So Divine by S.A. Cosby. And this came out of the Best American Mystery and Suspense of 2022. I like this story. This was, I'm always interested to read what S.A. Cosby writes. I've been very impressed by his books, although I don't think I'm going to read his newest one, only because harm to children is something I don't like to read about, and that is in this book. But this one was set in a blues club, an African-American owned, run, patronized blues club, and a white woman who happens to be the daughter of the grand wizard of the local KKK chapter or whatever shows up, and there's repercussions to that between her and the daughter of the owner of this club. And there's some history there. It was actually a really interesting story. It was very well written. I think S.A. Cosby, he's had great success with his books and he definitely deserves it. But I think that his books are all, they're all kind of mystery thriller-ish, which is fine. I love those books. But between this story and then during Horror Mayhem, when I read a short story collection of horror short stories in which he had a story, which was fantastic. I think that his abilities are wider than his novels would lead you on to believe. So I did really like that one. And that was called An Ache So Divine. And that was in one of these books. Which book was it in? It was in, not that one. Oh, well, it was in one of those books. So, and then the next book I read was Drafting by Jess in his book, The Angel of Rome and Other Stories. So this was a really interesting story about a young woman who was dealing with cancer, and I'm done with the cancer stories. As I've said in earlier videos, it's something I don't want to read right now. For reasons, you can look back and find out why. So I was like, oh, another cancer story. But the good news is, the prognosis is good for this character, so, that's good. That was a weird jump because I thought my son called me. Anyway, it was not my favorite story out of that collection so far. I don't know. It might have been as soon as I realized what it was, I kind of separated myself a little bit from it. I might have liked it better had I read it at a different time. And then I read The Landlady by Roald Dahl. So this one is not in the Roald Dahl collection that I had checked out from the library for this. It is a story recommended by my friend Karen, because Karen really, really wants me to realize the fact that she is twisted inside. This is sort of a very unsettling story about a young man who finds a boarding house that seems a little too welcoming. I enjoyed it, and thanks to Karen for sending me a link to where I could find it online, because it was not in that collection. And then the last official book that I read for Short Story September was Comfort by Alice Munro, and not a cancer story, but an ALS story. Yeah, it was a little easier to deal with, I guess. So this was a story about a woman. Her husband, her husband commits suicide. He has ALS. It was planned. He knew he was going to do it before he got to the point where his ALS was so advanced. That's not really what this story was about. So this man, he had been the local science teacher, and he had no tolerance for religious viewpoints. I don't know how to say this, because on one point I agree with him. creationism it shouldn't be taught in school. It's not science. So there were students who were saying you should also give it time, and I agree with this character that you shouldn't and all that. But this character was also one of those people who really liked to argue and would get people into arguments and try and trap them. And that's a personality characteristic that I despise. And so I had to really, I sympathized with this character, but I also couldn't stand him. But he dies really early on in the story. So after he dies, his wife, they had already planned for this to happen, and the plan was for her to be with him when he did this. And he decided to do it while she was off playing tennis. And then she can't find a suicide note, because how dare he leave without saying something to her. So there's this whole deal with this. And then you bring in the funeral director and his family, and there's history going on with that. It's a very layered story. It's actually one I'm still kind of trying to digest, and I might be blocking myself a little bit with how much I disliked the one character. And as I said, I'm conflicted with it because I understand his viewpoint, and I even agree with his viewpoint. His personality was one that just grated on me. So, but it was very well written. And Alice Munro, and these are the first stories I've read by Alice Munro, I really like her writing style and the way that I really have to struggle with a lot of her stories. I like that. And I think that's the sign of a really skilled short story author. And then there was my bonus story. I had to actually plan for this story to be number 30, but then Comfort, I finished it earlier than I planned. And this final story is The Bet by Anton Chekhov. And this is another story that was recommended by a friend of mine. This friend was an attorney. She was a prosecutor, and then she worked in the appellate system. So it makes complete sense that this would be her favorite short story. And this is about these two men make a bet. They're arguing which is the better or worse or whatever punishment, execution or life in prison. And they make a bet that this one man cannot stay imprisoned for 15 years. Now, his prison is not he's not in prison. He's in a room in a state, and he can't see anybody. He has no visitation. He can't leave this room. There's a window, but he can't leave this room. But he can get all the books. He has musical instruments. He's fed, all of this. So it's not a prison. Let's be fair. But the point is, he's separated from society. And the bet is with a banker. And it's interesting how it plays out. I totally understand why this is her favorite story. This was if I were to have a bunch of stories and, 20 stories, and each story was a best friend's story, I would know exactly this one was hers. I actually really enjoyed the story, although, again, I had to pull it off online. I'd gotten a Chekhov anthology, and this was not in it. And the one I got was apparently written. I mean, it wasn't written. It was to be used for vocabulary, because certain words were underlined and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized they were the SAT words. So it was taught as a vocabulary lesson. It was very strange, but a very good story. I might read Chekhov's short stories in the future. I returned that anthology because it didn't have the story in it. It was a bigger anthology. And I thought, well, if it's going to be between this and Roald Dahl, I'm going to read Roald Dahl's anthology instead. So, but I really liked it, and I think it was very clear why it was my friend's favorite story. So, 31 stories in 30 days, and what did I learn from this? One is I really love short stories. And I kind of knew this because I frequently have short story collections going, and I do really enjoy them. I like having that. Even though I read a lot of novels and longer work, I like having compact short story. Also, good short stories are very effective in getting a message across. And I like that. You can really tell the skill of an author in a short story. I do think, and I'm really looking forward to continuing with my Never Whistle at Night short story collection, because there are authors in that I have not yet read. Because I think a short story is almost a better introduction to an author than a novel, because you can tell really easily what their skill level is. So I really enjoyed it. I will definitely do this again next September. I might change the parameters a little bit because this was actually kind of easy. So I might make it a little bit more of a challenge for me next September, but we'll see. I've got a year to figure it out. Now, I'm not going to rank all of the short stories. And you can go, I will put the links down below of my previous updates. I won't put them in cards, I'll put them down below. So you can just go see my previous updates if you want to. But if I were to recommend specific short stories to read, I'm going to recommend 2 short stories I would really urge people to read. One is, and I think they need to be together because these 2 play really well together. And they're very powerful on their own, but together they really send a message to today's world. And those 2 are The Werewolf by Amakatsu, which you can find on Amazon. You can only get it on Amazon and Audible. That's an Amazon single. And Address Unknown by Catherine Cressman Taylor. So they're basically, well, I read The Werewolf first, and that is a story set during World War II in Germany, and Amakatsu uses sort of the form of a fairy tale to tell a story that's showing how people become radicalized. She says in her note afterwards, she wrote this after January 6th because that's the message she wanted to tell, and it comes through very clear and it's very powerful. Address Unknown was written in 1938, before World War II, about 2 friends. One, they're from Germany, but they were in the United States. They owned an art gallery together. One was Jewish, one wasn't. The non-Jewish one moved back to Berlin in 1938, and then they have letters going, son's watching TV in the other room, letters going back to each other, and you see the radicalization there. So it's interesting to put those together because the werewolf is looking back, saying, look, this happened, and this is where we are now. Look, you can see with the knowledge that we have now, looking back and seeing how this happened. But Address Unknown is not something that looks back. It looks at where we are now, or where it was when the story was written. And I kind of wish I had a time machine to go back and be in 1938 without the knowledge of World War II that was looming and read this story. Because you can, in retrospect, you can honestly see where things are going to go. But we didn't know that then because it hadn't happened. It's very shocking. And you really do see how the same thing is happening in the United States now. And it is terrifying. So those are the 2 stories that I really urge people to go read, and to read both of them and kind of consider them a unit. If I were to recommend, it's hard for me to recommend a collection at this point because I actually didn't finish any of the collections. I'm still reading through them, and you're going to start seeing them in my weekly updates as I go through and finish them. But if I were to recommend a collection, I'm going to recommend, based on what I've read so far, 2. One is Never Whistle at Night, which technically hasn't even been released yet. It comes out on October 10th. I've only read 1 story out of it. It blew me away. They're horror stories. Perfect time to read them. And the second one is Angel of Rome by Jess Walter. I've really enjoyed that one so far. Jess Walter is an author who I never think I'm going to like and then end up loving. So those are my thoughts on Short Story September. Thank you for those who've kind of followed along. As I said, I enjoyed it. I'll be doing it again next year, although I might be tweaking some things. Yeah. So give me a thumbs up if you made it this far. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And please join me on my Discord. It's a lot easier to have conversations with each other on Discord as opposed to in the comments on YouTube. So we can chat about things, short stories, whatever, in Discord. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.